I'm Jonathan Bober, Senior Curator of European Art here at the Blanton. And what I'd like to talk about at this moment is a very complex self-portrait of the early 19th century in France. It's a lithograph created by an artist, not merely an artist, a collector and one of the earliest and most important museum administrators in Europe named Dominique Vivant Denon. Denon was a very important collector, second half of the 18th century, and someone who managed to survive the vicissitudes of the French Revolution to become the first director of the first and greatest national museum in Europe, the museum that today we know and love as the Louvre. Denon was also a pioneering lithographer, one of the first printmakers, one of the first artists in France to experiment with the then very young technique of lithography, patented only in 1798. This large-scale lithograph was created exactly 20 years after that by Denon. This is by far his largest, his most complex, his most striking lithograph. It is a self-portrait, but a self-portrait of a very particular kind. In Italian draftsmanship since the 16th century, there had been a type of drawing, a composite study of physiognomies, fantastical studies of faces, ways in which artists would explore physiognomy, facial expression, to develop them for paintings, but also just to indulge their own fantasies. In this print, along with a few others of the late 18th century, in France, Denon has applied that composite physiognomic type to a real person, studying the same person from various points of view, various attitudes. And here Denon's gone a step further and applied that to his own physiognomy. On this cloth, he has rendered himself, imagined himself, at every stage of life, from mother's breast through adolescence to early professional activity to garb as dandy, that is artist also in social role, on to an old age that he is imagining here. The print is not merely that composite self-portrait, which would be interesting enough, an unusual enough transfer or move of familiar conventions, but that cloth is at risk of being cut by this great scythe, the blade of which you see here, held by a personification of time itself. Time, however, is resisted from cutting that cloth, symbol of Denon's own life, by two little winged geniuses, or putti. One trying to pull an hourglass, time, from the hand. The other with a cord pulling back the arm, straining to restrain Father Time. And as if that sense weren't clear enough, here in the lower left of the composition is a winter landscape, emblematic, symbolic of the twilight of the artist's life, as winter has always been emblematic of the twilight of lives. And there in the landscape stands a figure, unmistakable or unambiguously that of Denon himself, looking on to the previously rendered portraits, and there is another little genius comforting him in the twilight of his years. So this is a compound self-portrait of particular fantasy taken then back into an allegorical context, and a wonderful merger of traditions in Italian art and a wonderful demonstration of the expressive potential of the very young art of lithography.